Today we're going to cover from 1948 to 1993. And I felt this is an important period because it covers a lot. And I thought I was the only one that broke the timeline that way. Nobody else did. Then internet is a terrible thing. I checked just to see. And lo and behold, there is this website that have a timeline, 1948 to Oslo Accord 1993. And I laughed when I saw it because the name of the website, Communist. I didn't think there was too many communists left nowadays. But that was interesting, that the name of it. I said, okay. So I read a page of it, and I said, no, I stick with mine. As you all recall, just to refresh your memory, we talked about what took place prior to Israel's creation and announcing their independence and the foundation of the State of Israel. We talked about the partition plan because the British decided that things are getting messy and threw it to the United Nations. The United Nations drew up a partition plan. Just as a refresher, the partition plan gave the proposed Jewish state, which was 1/3, the population was 1/3 of the total population of Palestine. It gave them 56% of the land. Jewish ownership at the time of partition plan was 6% of the total land area. 2/3 of the population got 43% of the land area. So in numbers, the total Jewish population at that time was 548 individuals, while the Jewish people, and the Arab population was 1,205,000. The 1,205,000 were allocated 43%, and the 548,000 were allocated 56%. And in terms of ownership of the land, they only owned 6%. And we talked about how the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people started. So prior to May 15th and Israel declaring its independence, prior to that day, there was over 400,000 Palestinians already displaced and forced out of their towns. And we covered some of the an example of the Deir Yassin massacre, for example, and how they pushed through it. But on May 15th, Britain said, okay, our mandate will end on May 15th. We're done. We're going to withdraw. We'll leave Palestine alone. And the UN have a partition plan. Israel declared its independence on the evening of that same day. And they met and declared an independent state of Israel. Within 2 hours, literally 2 hours, it's not just to make the point, no. The state of Israel was recognized by two major powers, the United States and Russia, within 2 hours. And the United States recognition came with a guarantee. Not just we recognize you, we guarantee your continued existence. We will support you. So that day marks a shift where the Zionist movement and the idea of creating a Jewish state in Palestine was initially backed by European countries and the Zionist movement from Europe. But after the creation of the State of Israel, the United States adopted it. We will see to it that you will stay and forever. And it hasn't changed, regardless of what you do. We don't question. We don't question you. And they have not questioned Israel on anything. Because if you question Israel on anything, and I'm going to jump back and forth as usual, that's the way I do things. If you question Israel on anything, you're anti-Semitic. And who wants to be anti-Semitic? Especially after the horrors that anti-Semitism inflicted on the Jews of Europe, in Christian Europe. Be called anything but anti-Semitic. So it chilled opposition and silenced people because of the fear of this label. And they're still trying to use it. They're still using the same logic. If you say free Palestine, freedom to the Palestinians have right, you're anti-Semitic. But the world is changing because the real face of Zionism and political Zionism and Judaism are not matching. There's nothing in common, exact opposites. But anyway, Israel declared its independence. The Arab population in Palestine rejected the partition plan. They said, no way. We own 94% of the land, and you've given something that's not yours, just like the Balfour Declaration. You're giving our land to colonial settlers. No, that's not acceptable. We're not going to agree to that. And if if you want to divide it, do it equitably. They're 1/3 of the population or less than that. They should get certain, equal amount of land, or be part of the Palestinian state, because Palestine was supposed to be granted its independence when the mandate ended. Like the rest of the mandate countries that were divided between Britain and France, when the mandate ends, the country declares its independence. And in the case of Palestine, we divided into 2 states and dispersed the people into the diaspora. The natural thing is for the indigenous people to say no. And we go to the biblical story of Moses when he was faced with a child with 2 women claiming that it's their child. And he said, okay, give me the child, I'll split it in between you 2. The one that's not his real mother said, sure, that sounds like a fair deal. But the real mother said, no, you're not going to split my child. And this is the same thing. The Palestinians said, no, you're not going to split our country. So they resisted, and part of the Arab world, namely the countries bordering the State of Israel, decided that they want to launch a war to liberate Palestine. It's an interesting decision, considering the makeup of these Arab countries and their armed forces. These countries were led by hand-picked leaders that were picked by whom? By the colonial powers, by Britain and France, and given leadership position here. You have a country here. And what's even worse is the commanders of the Arab armies were British officers and French officers. That's why in Jordan there is crossing when you get into from Jordan to the West Bank to Palestine. It's called the Allenby Bridge. Now they've changed it to King Hussein, but among the locals it's still referred to as the Allenby Bridge after Allenby. Allenby is a British commander. The actual commander on the ground in 1948 that commanded the Jordanian and the Iraqi army that came to help the Palestinians was Glob Basha, a British army, British officer. The total number of people, of soldiers that were sent to invade this newborn country and destroy it, and was about 400,000, all combined. Egyptian, Jordanian, Syrians, Iraqis, 400,000, ill-equipped, ill-trained, because none of them were independent for any length of time. They still had the British and the French ruling them. And they were faced with 600,000 between the various Israeli or Zionist organizations that were under arms. Between the Haganah, the Irgun, the Stern, and Lehi, 600,000 strong, well-equipped, well-trained. And in the initial first few days, yeah, there was some successes to the Arab invading armies. But 2 months down the road, the Israelis countered their offensive, and they took more land. They pushed them back and took more land from Palestine. What happens afterward is not a peace treaty. What happened is what is referred to as armistice, which is a ceasefire, a state of non-belligerency. That's all it is. It didn't give anybody borders. It didn't recognize anybody's rights to exist or not exist. It's just a state of non-belligerency, an armistice agreement between Jordan and the State of Israel, between Lebanon and the State of Israel, and between Egypt and the State of Israel, because Egypt now is on the border, and then the Gaza Strip there, and somehow Gaza was left on one side from this proposed Palestinian state, separated by Israel. Then you have the West Bank. Then you go up north and it's separated. And you saw the maps last week that we on the handout. And it was just like a jigsaw puzzle of some sort. By the end of the war, if you recall, in the beginning we said there was about 400,000 Palestinians that were displaced before May 15th. After the end of the war, the number of Palestinians that were displaced was 750,000. 750,000, 39% of that went to the West Bank, because those who were close to the West Bank, they were pushed into the West Bank. 10% made it across the Jordan River into Jordan. 26% were in Gaza. 14% in Lebanon. 10% in the Golan Heights. And only 1% made it across the Sinai into Egypt. So you have the Palestinians dispersed, with the idea, and this is from personal knowledge and personal experience, of waiting until after the dust has settled, and they're going to go back in a couple of weeks. That's why the key is a symbol of Palestinian right of return and resistance, and you'll find these old keys that are this long in a lot of Palestinian homes, because they took the key with them. They locked their homes, and because we're coming back in a couple of weeks, things calmed down. Things didn't come down. Things continued, and Israel created borders, and no, nobody is going to return. What did the Palestinians do? They start going across the border to go back to their villages. And most cases, they went back to their villages to retrieve some things that they left behind, because they left so quickly that they didn't get a chance to take everything with them or anything with them. And they would go back, and some would get killed. And what did the Israelis do with these towns and villages that were caught in a war and they left? Depends on the village. I'll give you an example of two villages adjacent to each other. Al-Birwa and another village is called Jdeida and Al-Makr. Jdeida and Al-Makr, there was no resistance. Al-Birwa, they resisted. There was some Palestinian resistance when the Israeli, the Haganah and the Ergun went into town. It wasn't that big of a battle, but there was some resistance. Al-Birwa gets demolished completely, wiped off the face of the earth, and Jdeida remained. And this phenomena occurred over and over and over again. The armistice maybe ended the fighting, but it didn't end the destruction and the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. Talked about that. Talked about this. Interesting thing happened. The United Nations gets involved after the armistice. And we have one of the first United Nations resolutions, which is UN Security Council resolution, remind you, because Security Council resolutions are binding and enforceable. We destroyed a country as the United States. We destroyed a country literally based on a UN resolution. That UN resolution was based on fake information and lies. And that was the country of Iraq. Because when they said that Iraq was responsible for the 9/11, you recall, and they are training camps for Al-Qaeda, and they have weapons of mass destruction. Based on that, and our Secretary of State, Colin Powell, sits in the Security Council straight face and shows some trailers and an airplane and says, that's where they're training Al-Qaeda. Then it gets debunked. That actually what they were training on that plane is their security forces to prevent hijacking. That's what they were training. And the two trailers that the weapons of mass destruction that were next to it were the troops that were being trained. And that was vindicated after the war when they sent inspectors to look for weapons of mass destruction, and they found none. But we held on to the UN Security Council. We have to enforce it, and we destroyed Iraq, and Iraq hasn't recovered yet. And I'm not saying that Saddam Hussein was an angel or not, but this is what we used, UN Security Council resolution. Right after the war, in 1949, the United Nations Security Council issues the first resolution, which says that the Palestinians who fled, who were forced out, who were ethnically cleansed, you use the term that you like, have a right to return to their homes. They should be allowed to return. That was in 1949. We are in 2025. How many Palestinians were allowed to return? None. The right of return. This is one of the things that we continue to talk about and say, the right of return. Palestinians have a right to return. Someone that left Lid or Jaffa or Jerusalem or Gaza or the Negev doesn't have a right to return. But somebody that is by virtue of his faith and no other connection, none whatsoever, none, to Palestine except that the religious connection. He could be a convert, and more than likely his great-great-great-grandparents were converted to Judaism somewhere in Europe or in the United States, has a birthright. That person has a birthright to go there and at the entry point be asked a question. Do you want an Israeli citizenship? And all he has to do, or she, is say yes. And you granted Israeli citizenship, all right. But someone that was born there, his grandfather, great-grandfather, great-great-great-grandfather, 3,000 BC ancestors, 10,000 BC ancestors. No, they don't have no right. And they're still living in refugee camps. My brother-in-law, and the problems with being a refugee, it doesn't stop at not returning. My brother-in-law lives in Beirut, in Lebanon. He's 81 years old. He has a daughter, or actually 2 daughters and a son, that live in the UAE, United Arab Emirates, in Abu Dhabi. And because of the current alliances in the world, he has traveled to Abu Dhabi and to the UAE on several occasions on his Lebanese travel documents. You don't have a passport. You don't have a passport. He left with his mom and dad in 1948. He was born in 44. He was 40 years old when they went out of Bilbirwa and stayed there. And he'd been to the UAE on several occasions. Now that the world has changed, he wanted to go this past week with his wife to visit his son and his family and his 2 daughters. At the airport in Lebanon, they looked at his passport and they said, no, you can't go. You can't travel. Why can't I travel? I traveled on this travel document in the last 3 years at least 4 times. Here are the stamps from Lebanese authorities. So it's not us, it's the UAE. because your document is not complete. Similar to some of the things we're going through here in this country. Your document is not complete. He said, but it hasn't been complete ever since I had a document. And what's not complete is the day and month of his birth. Because it's back in those days in Palestine, you only get a birth certificate is when you either get married or you want to travel. Back in the 40s. You don't, and what do? You go to the head of the clan in your village, of the family, and you say, I need something to say when I was born. I was born the year that we had that big snow. What year was that? Okay, that was 1944. Okay, 1944. What day, what month, they don't know. So they put it, a lot of people you'll find either they put it January 1st, and that's why you see a lot of January 1st of the year, or it's an XXXX 1944. And in his case, that's what it was. So he reached out to a connection in the UAE, because his daughter is married to an Emirati citizen. He said, imagine, I need your help, man. And he said, sure. So he talks to somebody, there's nothing I can do. This became effective 3 months ago. And no Palestinian is allowed without a complete and exact date and document. But there is a solution. It's interesting how politics work. What's the solution? You go to the PA embassy, to the PA, the Palestine Authority embassy in Lebanon, and ask them to give you a fake birth certificate. Literally. How the hell are they going to get a birth certificate in 1944? Just they put their stamp on it, give you a fake birth certificate with a date for 1944, and you take that to the Lebanese authority and you change your travel document. It will have a date on it, then you can travel. Just another hurdle to jump. And this guy been living in Lebanon all his life. He worked as a teacher, then he worked as a principal in UNRWA schools, and he's retired. He's 81. So the hurdles that Palestinians are forced to jump, even without returning or asking to return to Palestine.
Did you get a fake birth certificate?
This just happened last week. I talked to him and I said to him, they're just trying to remind you that we are Palestinians. What the hell is wrong with them? Don't they know that we didn't forget who we are?
Right. Yeah.
They just, he said, yeah. I said, yeah, that's all it is. Don't take it, and it's not personal. They just want you to not forget that you are Palestinian. And go get that fake birth certificate. That gives the PA some significance and some importance, makes them relevant, because now they're not, who cares about what the PA does or say? No one. People are talking about the resistance movement, they're talking about Hamas, they're talking about everybody. But when a Palestinian talks about the PA, he talks about the Palestinian Zionists. I refer to them as a Zionist Palestinian apparatus, Palestinian Zionist organization, because they are literally doing the work of the Israeli army. That's what they're doing. And whatever the Israeli army asks, they do. You won't find anybody that is not employed directly by them will support them. Anyway, fast forward to, yes?
So I'm confused. So what is the Palestinian Authority made of? Are they Palestinians or are they?
No, they're Palestinians.
But, okay.
They are Palestinians, but we are no different than any other people. We have our good, bad, and ugly. We have our capitulationists. We have our people that self-centered and self-serving. You know, a classical example is our current PA president. He wasn't elected except for one 4-year term, and his term ran out in 2006 when he lost the election. His party lost the election in 2006, but he refused to accept the results, and he's still president. He's still president. And who's propping him up? The Israeli occupation forces. And why? Because he does exactly what they ask him to do. This is our reality. So anyway, let's go. During that time, there was some Palestinians that would buy weapons after 1948. Buy a shotgun that we use for hunting, buy an English rifle or something, and will they try to smuggle back to their town, and just in case we run into the Israeli defenders, we'll have something to fight with, because there were Palestinians getting killed. And the Israelis were continuously, where somebody crossed from, they'll go to that village and destroy that village, and further increase the number of the refugees. But important things happened in 1956. 1956, Egypt got rid of the king, King Farouk, and the free officers of Egypt took control of the government. And after a few months, the real leader of the coup, Jamal Abdel Nasser, became the president of Egypt. And there was the Suez Canal that was built in the late 1800s. It's a French controlled, and the Suez Canal Company controlled by the French and the British basically, and they owned it. They owned it. And owned all the revenues that came from it. So Jamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal. And he said, French and British, you're done. You can't just continue to occupy parts of Egypt and we call ourselves independent. You need to leave. As of today, we declare that the Suez Canal is an Egyptian waterway, and you guys have a nice day. Well, that didn't sit well with the colonial settler colonizer. How dare you? The French and the British decided they want to launch a war against Egypt. Who joined in with in that war? The State of Israel. Because its leadership in Israel saw an opportunity. And the opportunity is to grab more land. They have no stake in this war. The Suez Canal didn't belong to the Israelis. The French and British, the one that owned it, so they decided we're going to join in. There is some things that happened that really describe what the state of Israel is. In 1956. In 1956, something happened that's profound. And it's not the war. It's what Israel did to the Palestinian villages. This is going a little too far. But there is a village called Kufr Qasim. Israel, Kufr Qasim is in the midsection, the upper northern part of Palestine, but Kufr Qasim was inside Israel proper. The people of Kufr Qasim, the Arab inhabitants there, the villagers, were Israeli citizens. Israel military and Israeli government at 4:30 in the afternoon declares a curfew in many villages, amongst them Kufr Qasim. And the curfew to take effect at 5 p.m., 1700 hours. They declared it at 4:30, the announcement was made, but effective time, 5 p.m. And the order is shoot to kill anyone outside of his house. Shoot to kill anyone outside of his house. They sent a couple of military vehicles, military border police vehicles, the entrance of Kufr Qasim. They parked their vehicles and waited at the road that leads to the village. Waited for who? For Palestinians coming home from work. They had no idea that there is a curfew. Because they went to work in the morning, there is no curfew. They waited for them at the entrance of the village. So after 5 o'clock, people started coming home. They'll take him out of their cars, off their bikes, take him to the side, and shoot him, kill him. Palestinians, by ethnicity, but they're Israeli citizens. And the political leadership, when they gave the order to shoot to kill, said it would be nice to have some casualties. So you tell that to a military commander of a unit, what are you telling him? You want to see some casualties. They ended up killing 49 Palestinian villagers. They were just coming home. Just coming home from work. Why? Because we want further motivation for the Palestinian that are Israeli citizens to leave. That you're not safe, even though we refer to you as Israeli Arabs. Well, there was an uproar about Kufr Qasim, because as we progress in life, things can't hide them anymore. It's not that the Israelis want to hide ethnically cleansed Palestinians, but they start catching flack about what happened. Hey, this is ridiculous, you need to investigate, just like we asked him to investigate today. You need to investigate what happened. So they investigated what happened, and they said, well, the soldiers involved, they didn't follow orders the way it should have been followed, and they're going to be tried. Okay, sure. They tried them. They were put on trial. And the commander of the unit was fined. Was fined. 1 Israeli agora. Not even a shekel. Not even a whole shekel. Like 1 penny. And that's their record, their court record. And they were placed in jail. Not one of them, not a single one, was in jail after 1960. And when they got out of jail, full compensation, like if they were in uniform and working all the time. So they got a 4-year vacation. Some of them didn't last 4 years, with full pay, and nothing else happened. And that stands out because of who these Palestinians were. And they were nowhere near the border with Egypt in 1956. They were way up in the middle of the country, but they wanted to drive people out. It's an opportunity. So we see that Israel, it's not that really peaceful, small country that's surrounded by a sea of Arabs that want to destroy it. I mean, that logic, it blows my mind. When you take a European colonial settler and put him in the Middle East, in Palestine, what in the world are you expecting them to be surrounded by? They're going to be surrounded by Arabs. And they're going to be hostile. Of course they're going to be hostile, because this was supposed to be an Arab country at the end of the mandate, like the rest of the Arab countries. And now we have a colonial settlement, a settler state. Oh, surrounded by Arabs, surrounded by Muslims. Hello, you brought it into the midst of this region, and you planted it there. Yes, ma'am, I see your hand is up.
Yes. Could you please spell the name of that village you were talking
Kafar
about?
Qasim?
Yeah.
Is it in one of the handouts?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it's one of the handouts, and the reason I made it into the handout because of the significance it carried, unlike other towns and villages.
And it's got the sources on the bottom too, for a lot of the articles.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any copies left of the last week's map?
Yes,
Page?
I'll get it to you. And that wasn't the only massacre that took place after the creation of Israel. We have, in October of 1953, the massacre of Gibeon. And that was 69 Palestinians were killed. And wherever, like I said earlier, wherever there is any little sign of resistance, the Israelis go in, destroy the village, literally destroy the village, and kill as many people as they find, and pull back. Across-border raids. And the numbers and the names and the dates are continuous. It's not like we have a breakout war, like 56, then 67, and everything was nice and quiet until 67. No. There was many Israelis incursions into many little Palestinian towns. The town of Samoa by Hebron, Nahalin, Gibeah, and every now and then you have a major, what they call flare-up, a major flare-up. It's not a major flare-up, it's a pressure cooker, and Israel decides that we need to do something to continue to receive the support and to project the image that we are surrounded by hostile people. They thrive off that. And, that brings us kind of to why AIPAC was founded. Because somebody asked about AIPAC.
What are the initials?
The American Israeli Political Action Committee. The first seeds for AIPAC, the nucleus for AIPAC, was after the massacre of Kibya, the town of Kibya in October of '53. Israel was getting a lot of flack in the US and other places about, you commit a massacre against populations that are unarmed civilians. You can't continue to do this. So the Jewish agency, it wasn't called AIPAC at the time, they formed the first organization, was in 1954, before the name changed to AIPAC, and was to counter the negative publicity that was Israel getting, to control the narrative of what is disseminated in the public sphere and in the media. That was the initial reasoning behind that organization. Then it evolved into AIPAC later on in the early 80s, actually. It became AIPAC as we know it today, and start controlling politicians by the purse. In 1964, the PLO. This is the Arab League. The Palestine Liberation Organization was founded by the Arab League initially, the Arab states. They said, we need somebody Palestinian to speak on behalf of the Palestinians. We can't just ignore them. And they formed the Palestine Liberation Organization. Before the Palestine Liberation Organization, there was a contingent of Palestinian brigades included in the Egyptian army and in the Jordanian army. There was Palestinian brigades that will support, they'll train them, but they're under the command of the Egyptian and the Jordanian and the Iraqi, small units, but they're Palestinian in character. And this is called the Army of Liberation, جيش التحرير الفلسطيني, أو الكفاح المسلح الفلسطيني, the Palestinian armed resistance, but they're part of these groups. Then they formed the PLO as a political organization in 1964. And they held their first council in Jerusalem in 1964, and elected a general secretary by the name of Ahmed Shukairi, and he was from Gaza, and he was very closely aligned with the Egyptians. And that was fine. But in 1965, some Palestinians said, this is not fine. To liberate Palestine, we can't just be a mouthpiece for the Arab countries. And out of the General Union of Palestinian Students, a guy by the name of Yasser Arafat started organizing in Cairo and talking to fellow students. Now, we can't let the Arabs, these regimes, these puppet regimes, control the narrative. And these army units that belong to these countries, they're not doing anything. They're just like the rest of their armies, they're for show. And the more he talked, the more he found students that were receptive. And he found some Palestinians that were working in Kuwait and had some money, and they decided, okay, let's do something different. And Fatah was formed. Fatah stands for حركة التحرير الوطني الفلسطيني.
How do you spell that?
F as in Frank, A as in Apple, T as in Tom, A as in Apple, H as in Harry. Fatah. Fatah. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. They formed their organization and they said, okay, we have to take on Israel as a resistance movement. We have to take on armed struggle. We can't continue to just talk about it. And January 1st, 1965, that's why it's celebrated as the founding of the PLO. They launched their first cross-the-border raid into Israel. It was publicized, it was successful, that here's a Palestinian organization that's doing this. And there was a few other smaller skirmishes here and there. And other groups found their calling as well. A Palestinian Christian doctor by the name of George Habash, who was a Marxist-Leninist. Maybe he's got something to do with that website that I talked about. Formed the PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. That was a purely Marxist-Leninist organization and advocated for social change, liberation, total liberation of Palestine, including for liberating the Jews before the Muslims and the Christians from the claws of capitalism and imperialism. And other groups came about afterwards, but George Habash was from Al-Qawmiyin al-Arab. There is a pan-Arab nationalist movement that he was involved in, and that's where the PFLP, and it becomes important a couple of years later, after 65. So, Palestinian organization carried out attacks against Israel. And there is no one single Palestinian attack against Israeli armed forces or settlers to where somebody can say, oh, they committed a massacre. Oh, they wiped out a town. None. They will go in and probably run into the guards, exchange some gunfire, and if they survive and kill one or two of the guards, that's considered a huge success. And not to say that if they were able to get in, they wouldn't have killed more. Because the end result always have been, when they were able to get in, and there is some instances where they did. A group from DFLP fighters in the 70s entered from southern Lebanon, and their instruction was to take hostages so they will exchange them for prisoners, for Palestinian hostages in Israeli jails. So they go into the town of Tershiha, which is the Israeli named it Ma'alot, and they take hostages in the Nahal paramilitary training unit. Nahal, which is for younger youth, it's a feeder organization into the Israeli army. So they took hostages and said, okay, here's our demands. We'll release the hostages, but we want the following Palestinian prisoners to be released. That was their demand. And they gave them the list, this is what we want. And the Israelis negotiated for a day. Then the decision was made from the beginning that no one leaves alive. No one. Okay, you're going to kill the 4 Palestinians that are holding the 18 Israeli youth. How are you going to do that without killing some of your own? And they made the decision. They lobbed grenades into the building and anti-armor shells to bust the walls, and they killed everybody. Of course, the Palestinians got killed, but the Israelis that were in there got killed as well. And this has been the Israeli policy when it comes to Palestinian negotiation, and we see it again. We see it again and again and again. We see it in '72 in Munich. It wasn't the Palestinians, it wasn't the Germans that killed the Israeli hostages, the Israeli athletes. It was the special unit sent from Israel to Munich, Germany in 1972 with clear instructions: they will not leave the tarmac. We don't want to have to deal with the Palestinians in control taking these athletes into an Arab country, and then we're going to have to find them in the Palestinian camps from somewhere. No one leaves the tarmac. That was the instructions of the Israeli unit that was sent to Munich. And everything was done between the Palestinians that took the Israeli athletes and the German government, that they will have a safe passage and they will get on a plane and they will take them to a destination in the Arab world somewhere, or maybe not the Arab world, who knows, maybe they were going to take them to Cuba, I don't know. But the Israelis made a decision and no one leaves the tarmac. And they start shooting. They kill the Palestinians and the athletes. We see it happening today. We see it happening today. They're killing the Palestinians and they're killing their own hostages. They don't care. Because Zionism couldn't care less about Judaism. And I'm not a Jew to say that. You ought to listen to the Jewish scholars that say that. It's a colonial settlement project. So this state that was planted in the middle of the Middle East, we have this 56 war, several incursions and massacres into Palestinian towns and villages across the border occurred. In 1967, there was the drumbeat war. Israel attacked several places. One of them is Samua by Hebron. There was in early '67 in the Golan Heights with Syria, skirmishes every day, every week, and nothing has changed. Unfriendly government. The Arabs, they wanted the Arab regimes to pacify the nationalist movement. Israel has to be defeated. Palestine has to be liberated. There was a lot of talk, and even there was a quote that the Israelis use continuously: they're going to drive them into the sea, they're going to bury them into the sea. Okay? There is, and I challenge any Zionist anywhere to find any Arab leader or any Arab in a leadership position or Palestinian that used that line, that we're going to drive Israel into the sea, we're going to bury them into the sea. any of them. But probably it was used, this particular line, by a journalist or a commentator that said, when you planted Israel here in the heart of this sea of Arabs, they're going to be buried in that sea. And I believe the guy's name was Ahmed Said that said that line. He was a political commentator. That becomes all of a sudden the Arabs want to drive Israel and bury Israel into the sea. They want to commit another Holocaust. They want to kill all the Jews. And they beat it and talked about it. And I was a 13-year-old in the little town of Bir Mabala. And I hear the drum beats of war. And I said, man, maybe liberation is coming. Maybe I get to see Suba, my grandmom's and granddad's town. Maybe liberation is coming, but if it's not liberation, war is coming. All this talk, war is coming. And I hate to say it, it turned out to be I was right. And I read it correctly. I said Israel is not making up all these stories if they have no intention of a fight. I wish that the Arab governments read it the way I did, because they sure as hell didn't. And in June of '67, Israel launched what they called a preemptive strike. Preemptive what? Preemptive what? So within, they say it's a 6-day war, but it's really took 5 days. 5 days it was over. But they say 6 because it's the story, the biblical story of the creation. They always try to play the religious card. But the war was over in actually the first 6 hours. We saw Israeli jets pass over our village, and in the first 6 hours they took out the Egyptian Air Force completely, not just took it out completely. Jordanian Air Force, Syrian and Lebanese Air Force, even Lebanon has a couple of British Hawker Hunters or some weird planes that they took them out. And the Iraqi Air Force were taken out in the first few hours of the war. Then the Israelis just, how fast can they drive their tanks? That's all that's really determined, and how much territory they can cover. So in 5 days, they take over Gaza, the entire Sinai Peninsula, all of it, the entire West Bank, the Golan Heights. It took them 5 days to get their troops into these areas. This is a vast area we're talking about. And the Arabs, all this talk, without air cover, you have nothing. The Jordanian army had a artillery encampment outside of our village that lobbed, I don't want to say 5 or 6, but definitely less than 20 shells that they fired towards the Israeli lines. The Israelis fired back, and we can hear the stones where the explosion, the artillery piece explodes, and the stones land on their vehicles. We could hear it like rain, you know. By morning, they hooked up their cannons to their trucks, and they took off. The next stop was east of the Jordan River. There was no war. There was no real fighting. But that wasn't it. Israel didn't stop there. Again, we have UN resolution, Security Council. We have the resolution 242, the inadmissibility of acquiring land by force, by war. Israel must withdraw to the pre-June 6th or June 5th actually lines. Hasn't happened yet. Hasn't happened yet. But, and also they reaffirmed resolution 194, which says the Palestinian must have a right to return. We reaffirm that, and the inadmissibility of the acquisition of land by war. They're there. None have been implemented, and Israel have no reason to implement it. Because at the same token, when we say that, we say, but we're willing to give you whatever you need. We give you whatever you need, just like we're doing now. Oh, Israel has a right to defend itself against who? And to defend itself is simple. Give the people that you're occupying their rights in the occupation. Give your Arab inhabitants equal citizenship and equal rights. Then you'll be safe. It's simple. No, we give them 2,000-pound bombs. We give them missiles. We give them the right to nuclear weapons. Israel is the only nuclear power in the Middle East. We don't question that. But if somebody else thinks about nuclear power, we draw a line in the sand. No way. We're going to clobber Iran if they think about nuclear weapons. They have to abandon their nuclear program. We destroyed Iraq without having a nuclear program because we think they might have one day. But Israel have a right. They have nuclear weapons. And it's okay. And they're not a signer. They're not a signer to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. They're exempt. So these resolutions are toothless. They carry no weight. And the Israelis know that. So yeah, pass all the UN resolutions you want. Try to implement one. Who's going to force us? The US? No. We got their politicians in our pocket. You say two words against Israel, and AIPAC comes into play. AIPAC is the highest political lobbying group, the highest donor in the US. And that's not counting Zionist donors that donate independently outside of AIPAC. Like the Adelson family that donated $30 million to Donald Trump twice. You're trying to tell me that he's going to do anything that's not going to be dictated by Bibi Netanyahu? There is a statement when it comes to Israeli U.S. foreign policy vis-a-vis Israel. It's like the tail wagging the dog. They control what goes on, not us, when it comes to what's happening there. Things didn't stop in 67. In 68, like we talked about the Karama battle, and after the Karama battle with the Palestinians, with the PLO fighting groups, there was an increase in the number of Palestinians wanting to join the resistance movement in Jordan. Then an event happened in September of 1970. And that's why it's referred to as Black September. The PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, led by George Habash, hijacked several airplanes, 3 airplanes, simultaneously, and landed them in a desert strip in Jordan. And again, they asked for an exchange, Palestinian political prisoners with Israel. And Israel said no. And my position on that hijacking hasn't changed. I wrote an article, I was in high school, John Marshall High. And some people asked, what is going on? So I took a pencil and a paper and I wrote them, why did the hijacking take place? The Palestinian cause is being ignored, Palestinian refugees being ignored. They wanted to be heard. And this is lashing out. Who are the hijackers? It's important to know who are they and why they did it. Even though I don't support it, I don't agree with it, but I can understand it. When people are cornered, they resist with any means they have. And the world was ignoring that there is a Palestinian refugees, that these people belong, they have homes to go to. The question of the Palestinian refugee becomes a humanitarian issue. Allow them to build concrete walls in the camps. But you can't have a ceiling except the corrugated sheets of metal. That's an achievement. No, that's not an achievement. Allow them to return to their homes. That will be an achievement. They try to pacify the Palestinians with these things. Set up a clinic. Allow the Red Crescent to set up clinics in the refugee camps. So that's an achievement. No, that's not achievement. Allow them to go back to their towns and villages and rebuild them and live their lives. So yeah, Palestinians did lash out. And as a result of this event, the Jordanian government decided or was ordered by their keepers to get rid of the Palestinian resistance in Jordan. So we have Black September, the crackdown of the Jordanian army against the Palestinian movement. And they went into Palestinian camps, killed a lot of Palestinians, civilians and fighters. Then a deal was struck to end that, but the Palestinians fighting groups, the PLO at that time, has to leave Jordan. Where do they go? They have to leave Jordan to Lebanon. So we have the PLO, the PFLP and Fatah and the DFLP and all of these organizations packing their bags and heading north to Lebanon. And that's the first time we have Palestinian resistance organizations in Lebanon. They were welcomed by the Palestinian organizations there, or by the Palestinian populace there, because the Palestinians in Lebanon were controlled by the Lebanese security, and there was a special unit to control the Palestinian refugees, and when a sergeant from that unit will walk into the Shatila or Sabra camp or any of these camps, he walks in there and said, I am Sergeant so-and-so. I will step with my boots on the biggest mustache in this camp. Now I need all the leaders of all the different families to line up. This is the treatment they got. So when they saw the resistance movement coming into the camps, and they told that sergeant, get the hell out, we're in control now, they were welcomed by the local population. Because oppression leads to resistance. It's human nature. These people were oppressed for so long, and you have somebody that's come and say, I'm going to save you, and we're going to fight. You don't have to take this. People are going to do what? They're going to say, absolutely. Man, I get even with this guy? Sure. The 6-Day War, we have more refugees, of course, after it was all said and done. And it didn't stop there. There was continuous wars going on. In 1973, the Arabs decided basically Syria and Egypt, and Jordan was supposed to be part of it, but King Hussein of Jordan, after meeting in Cairo with the presidents of Egypt and Syria, in his helicopter landed in Tel Aviv, went to Golda Meir and said, hey, the Egyptians and Syrians and the Jordanians are planning to attack you. And Golda Meir said, you're a good boy. Thank you for that, but I don't think so. Our information says, no, they're just talking. It's just Arabs talking. But you're a good boy, thank you. He said, I just came out of the meeting, letting you know what took place. Sure enough, it turned out to be real. So in 73, the Egyptians crossed the Suez Canal and took over part of the Sinai, kicked the Israelis out of the Sinai, and they crossed what is called the Bar-Lev line, which was the Israelis' defense line that was impenetrable. That was state of the art. They were able to breach it, and the Syrians crossed part of the Golan. Then we got a ceasefire, and Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt, in a goodwill gesture to Israel, he flies to Tel Aviv and addresses the Knesset that we want to make peace. And we recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state and just, withdraw from our territory, mainly the Sinai. And we have the Camp David Accords, the agreement that Israel withdrew from the Sinai, but the West Bank wasn't part of the deal. The Golan Heights were not part of the deal. And Israel continued every now and then its aggressions wherever there was resistance. So in Lebanon, in 77, Israel, it's not the first time like they took the south of Lebanon is now. This is probably the third time that they went in and occupied it and killed and maimed, and after a few years they leave. They install their puppets, divide and conquer. They divided the Lebanese army, and they installed a commander by the name of Lahud, a Christian militia leader, and they propped up what's called the Lebanese Army, Lebanese Liberation Army. They formed a unit other than the Lebanese National Army. And they said, these are the people that can be in the south. The Lebanese National Army can't. So, a puppet organization for them. And that continued in the 70s. The Palestinians in Lebanon were not safe. Lebanon had a civil war, which is pitted different Lebanese factions against each other. There was the right-wing Christian Phalange Party that basically wanted a Christian state. And Lebanon, that's another story, but just to give you a little bit of it, when the French left Lebanon, they sowed the seed for disaster to come. They set up a government based on religion. The president will be a Maronite Christian. The Speaker of the House will be a Shiite Christian. And the Prime Minister will be a a Shiite Muslim. And the Prime Minister will be a Sunni Muslim. And this is enshrined in their constitution based on religion. Whenever you divide a country or a constitution, anything based on religion, and when you have multiple religions and communities in the country, it's not going to work. These are the seeds for conflict, and each one of these guys would have his own organizations, own militias, and the Palestinians were caught in between all of this. So there was a civil war in Lebanon. And the civil war in Lebanon, who's targeted? There was one Palestinian camp called Tal Zatar that was a little bit isolated from the rest of these camps. The right-wing Phalange Party went into the Tal Zatar, and the estimates, again, it's estimates, 2,000 to 3,500 Palestinians were killed. And the rest were forced to leave because it was in a Christian area. So Palestinians recognize there is no safety for Palestinians except in Palestine, in a liberated Palestine. Just because we're in Lebanon, we're not safe. In Jordan in 1970, the numbers are also not small. Then even 1982, Israel decided, hey, you want to take out the PLO because there is some incursions that come in from Lebanon. So they invade Lebanon. And they march on all the way to Beirut. And they seize and surround an Arab capital for the first time. Beirut was under siege for 80 days. In the end, they struck a deal with the PLO leadership that you have to leave Lebanon. Take some of your fighters with you, those who are high up, and the rest will be disarmed, and you have to leave Lebanon. The agreement they agreed to was that safety and security for the Palestinian people would be guaranteed by the negotiators, namely the US. Palestinian civilians in the camps will be safe. Yasser Arafat and the leadership of the PLO and some of their fighters, they get on boats and they head out. What happened after that? The Israelis were in control. The Phalange, right-wing Christian party, didn't like the idea of having refugee camps in Beirut. So there was two camps adjacent to each other called Sabra and Shatila. The Israelis were in charge. The Israelis said, we'll secure the perimeters of the camp, and you go in. But you only have 48 hours. You do what you have to do. I said, well, we need flares. We need lights. So we'll provide you. So they go into Sabra and Shatila on the 16th of September, and for 43 hours they killed over 3,500 Palestinians. At the time, my wife, we were expecting our second child. She was pregnant. And we saw some of the pictures. And we thought one of them was her dad, because of the location, older gentleman, the body, that's what we saw. And we couldn't place a call like today or get on WhatsApp. So it took us several days before somebody was able to go somewhere and make a phone call and tell us that no, it wasn't him. He was out of the camp at the time, and his wife. But every Palestinian went through that in different locations, different places. Even being in the United States, we're not immune, because our extended families and our immediate families are there. I place a call to the West Bank, to Bir Nabala on daily basis. On daily basis, checking on my sisters. Are you okay? Are you able to travel? Let's see, how can I get the first Intifada?
Any pictures?
Yeah,
Yes.
you're the man here. So anyway, after the PLO left, the PLO was in Tunis. They have no effect on what's happening. The people in the West Bank were getting restless at best. The PLO is destroyed, they capitulated, whatever, they tried to save their necks. So we have the first Intifada. The first Intifada is referred to as uprising, that's all it means. And the trigger was, go to the next one. Or can I control that?
Not sure.
Let's see. No. It was triggered by Israeli military vehicles, they say, crashing into a Palestinian car and killing its inhabitants. Go to the next one. Go. Here is the Palestinian vehicle that was crashed by an Israeli military vehicle. And that was the catalyst, that was the trigger. It started in Gaza, quickly spread into the West Bank. It was peaceful. It was demonstrations, boycotts, strikes, but strictly peaceful, because unarmed civilians unarmed civilians. We're talking 87. There is no PLO, there is no Hamas. The PLO is in Tunis. It's been disarmed in Lebanon. They had no existence in the West Bank except in some social organizations. Hamas didn't exist. There was an organization for the Muslim Brotherhood in the West Bank and Gaza that was mainly doing social services programs, opening schools, clinics, filling the gaps for the needs of the Palestinian people. And all these organizations, the significance of the first Intifada was every Palestinian participated in it. It was a popular uprising, including my late mother and father. My mother, Allah yarhamha, may God rest her soul, she will take clothes, shirts, pants, jackets from the house that's probably left from her kids, and she has no use for them, and take him. We had like 5 acres behind our house, and put him in different locations under the trees, on these retaining walls, because when the army comes to look for kids that were throwing stones, the kids will run, so the kids will find a different colored shirt that they will take and put it on and come back walking. And the soldier is looking for somebody wearing a red shirt, and here's this guy wearing a brown shirt. So it's not him. So she would do that. My dad would sit in the garage and take penny nails and bend them with a hammer and a wrench to where they would sit. And he carries them in his hand and walk in the main road and throw them, because there is no Palestinians traveling on these roads, only Israeli military vehicles. So he'll throw them there, so when an Israeli Jeep comes, it'll flatten his tires. Simple things. But that just tells you that even someone that was my age at the time participated and saw the importance of collective and popular uprising. Yasser Arafat and the PLO in Tunis didn't know what's happening. Didn't know who was behind it. The communiques that were issued on weekly basis were by the name of the Unified Command of the Uprising, of the Intifada. It wasn't PLO. Yasser Arafat was having a fit. There's only one representative that speaks for the Palestinian, and that's the PLO as of 1974, when the Arab League decided that the PLO is the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinians. So how come these people are issuing communiques and it's not the PLO? They should send it by fax to me in Tunis, and then we will issue it. We'll send it back. So we will have our stamp on it. And the Unified Command in the West Bank and Gaza said, no, we're not sending it to you, Tunis. You have nothing to do with it. One Palestinian leader, his name is Salah Khalaf, and he said the only thing we should do as the PLO is just support them. We should not interfere. It's successful, it's peaceful, it's working. The Israelis are looking bad in the world because their order was break the bones. To break the bones of the Palestinian who are participating in rock throwing or any participating in the demonstrations. It's shown all over the world. They are looking bad. We should just support the Intifada. He was killed a week later. in Tunis by the Israeli Mossad. The Israelis were talking about withdrawing from the occupied areas unilaterally. Will leave Gaza and parts of the West Bank, let's get out of the major cities. Rabin said, I'm going to lose. And on my watch, we're going to have to abandon some territory. And you, Yasser Arafat, you're going to lose because you're not going to come back here. So let's make a deal. They started the Madrid conference, which was just a show. Israelis and Palestinians met in the same conference hall. That was the significance of that. Then they had peace talks in Washington, D.C. They picked Palestinian nationalists and sent them to Washington with Israelis. I met with those Palestinians and I asked them, said, hey, Dr. Abdel Shafi from Gaza and Hanan Ashrawi, you guys all familiar with Hanan Ashrawi, political science professor from UVA. And I said, don't sell out the Intifada. You have a decent history of being a nationalist, Dr. Abdel Shafi. He looked at me and said, what's your name again? I said, my name is Adib. And who you represent? I said, I work with the ADC in New York and blah, 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 and I'm Palestinian. And I said, okay. We're sitting here drinking coffee, and we get breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We haven't had a single meeting. We haven't met. We're not like we're meeting with the Israelis. They're here and we're here, but there's no meetings going on. That was a decoy. That was a decoy. The real meetings were happening in Oslo. The real meetings between the Israelis and the Palestinians were happening in Oslo. One other point, as I said earlier, that there was no Hamas, but there was Islamic Brotherhood that had some social organizations and schools and what have you. The Israelis decided that's not enough. We have to break the uprising. Because how can we break it? Break it from within. We need to prop up somebody else to counterbalance the unified command. They found a willing partner in the Jordanian government and the Crown Prince Hassan, the brother of King Abdullah, of King Hussein. He said, start financing and use your influence so Hamas will adopt violent resistance. So they will become an armed group. Sure enough, you finance them, and we, the Israelis, will give them space to start to build up, because they can never amount to anything in the Palestinian society, but it will fragment the Palestinians, because the Palestinians have never been unified as much as they were in the first Intifada. So we start seeing slogans for Hamas and communiques for Hamas. When the unified command says strike on Thursday, well, Hamas comes out and says strike on Tuesday, not Thursday. Contradicting messages, and the Israelis will look the other way when it comes to Hamas messaging. Divide and conquer. And this why Oslo was born. The Oslo Agreement came as a direct result that the PLO leadership, after all these years, they've been relegated as irrelevant. And the Israeli leadership occupation is unsustainable. We can't continue. They start talking about unilaterally leaving Gaza, leaving part of the West Bank, and they said, okay, let's make a deal. So they struck a deal with the PLO leadership. And what's the deal? You come back so you can co-opt. When you're there, everybody's going to say the PLO is back, and you're the legitimate spokesman for the Palestinian people, so the unified command will cease to function, and we'll give you some authority. We'll give you something. And this is Edward Said. God rest his soul as well, a good friend of mine, professor at Columbia, a great Palestinian thinker. And he said, it was clear, it's that total surrender and capitalization Oslo Accord is not an agreement. The Palestinians signed exactly what the Israelis want. The Israeli negotiator called Rabin and said, hey, the Palestinian starting position is much lower than what we were willing to give at the end of the negotiations. They're not willing, they don't want to, they agreed that Jerusalem should not be included in this agreement. The right of return will be negotiated at a later stage. Water and natural resources will be negotiated at a later stage. Borders of this proposed state will be negotiated at a later stage. Everything to be negotiated on a later stage. And they agreed to it. Rabin's reaction was, are you sure? They said, yes. He said, okay, have another meeting in 2 days, and I'm sending my personal lawyer. So he sent his personal lawyer there, and they hold a meeting and said, who's this guy? Said, oh, this is the personal lawyer of the prime minister. He sent him here. He wants to write it in a legal format, the agreement that we agreed on. So we're going to go over it one more time, Mr. Abu Ala, which is Ahmed Kriya, the head of the Palestinian delegation, and Saad Harakat. So they go over it, and the guy is writing notes. He's just sitting in the corner writing notes. He said, okay, I'll have it written for you 2 days. 2 days later, he comes and said, here's your copies. And the head of the Palestinian delegation looks at it and said, that's total capitulation. That's total surrender. And the attorney looks at him and says, Mr. Kriya, well, you prefer me to call you Mr. Abu Ala, because that was his given name, Abu Ala. He said, doesn't matter. He said, is there anything there that I added that you didn't agree on, or that you didn't say? If there's something there that I put in that wasn't in the agreement, tell me. I'll take it out right now. Flips through it. No. It's okay. You need to sign. He signed. On his way out of the hotel where they're meeting, and there's an interview on a VHS, which is this young man's job is one day to turn it into one of these things that you could put on internet nowadays. He stands there and he says, I learned a valuable personal lesson about negotiations, so that what you say, you're going to be held to. You sold out the Palestinian cause, and you learned a valuable personal lesson how to negotiate, that you shouldn't say what you don't mean. No, you meant everything you said, as long as you get it. And when they allowed the PLO back in Jericho, Jericho and Gaza first, several things happened, and we'll talk about it next time, but quickly, the first thing they allowed them to build was a casino in Jericho, and that is copying what we did to the Native Americans here. On every reservation we have a casino and a liquor store. That's how they built the Palestinian economy. They built a casino in Jericho. and they built an academy, a military police academy, that trained the security forces for the PA by Dayton, Colonel, I believe he's Colonel, not sure, in the US Army. He's the head of that academy, to train them how to police the Palestinians. And security coordination, these agreed on right away. They weren't left for later, like everything else. Security coordination for who? The Israeli settlers and their roads, and the Israeli army and their roads and their camps. The PA, their security forces, was to coordinate the security of the occupiers, to control the Palestinian population, to prevent further any future resistance.